Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. So, welcome to the first day of Ramadan and our second session, which we're going to be covering the second juz of the Quran, or the second part of the Quran. As you might remember from yesterday, we were talking about Surah Al-Baqarah, and really quickly, Surah Al-Baqarah and the name of itself, Baqarah, it reminds us, or it's telling us about how the Muslim nation, the Muslim Ummah, is being trusted as a Khalifa, right? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, or towards the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, that He was going to entrust a new Khalifa, and the angels were questioning it, right? And so in this, we're learning that as successors, the Bani Israel, or the Jews, were not able to meet those requirements of a successful successor. And so because of that, that responsibility was going to be taken away from them and given to the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so we're going to talk about that in a bit, but I just want to mention a few things about the qualities a true successor or khalifatun fil ard needs to have. First, they have to have taqwa in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have to have fear and obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They also need to be obedient towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala according to a complete and comprehensive manhaj, a way of life. And so following the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And lastly, becoming unique through a distinct character. Our character as Muslims should be very special, and something that someone can recognize right away, that there's something special about this person in the way they carry themselves, the way they act, and whatnot. Now, what I'm going to do is, inshallah, the ayah number 141, and you could follow along in your Quran with me. Actually, 142 is the first ayah of the second juz. So ayah number, or verse number 142 of Surah Al-Baqarah, Sayakulu Sufaha, and so on. So I'm going to describe one ruku at a time. And so the first ruku, which is basically 142 all the way to 147, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Muslimin to face the Kaaba as in their prayers. And we might remember the story where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and some Sahaba, they were praying and they faced they were facing Jerusalem, and then their direction changed. They actually had to change all the way around, so they started to face, instead of north, faced south. And this was 16 to 17 months after the Hijrah. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was looking for this change. He was because of his love for Mecca and so on. So he didn't want to face Jerusalem. And even in Mecca, he would face the Kaaba, but he would face in the direction of Jerusalem. In Medina now, it was his back was towards the Kaaba or Mecca, and his face was towards Jerusalem. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after about 16 to 17 months, he changed this Qibla. And this was a sign to the Bani Israel, the Jews, that this is a coming of a new prophet, a new deen, and a new ummah, and they better change up and shape up. But a lot of them, because their arrogance, they didn't change. Excuse me, my throat's kind of dry. And so they raised some objections to this, of why they're going to do this. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the ummah, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ وَيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ عَلَيْكُمْ شَهِيدًا, that we are the middle ummah, and so on. And we are moderate in our approach for everything. The second ruku goes from 148 to 152. This ruku, this section, you could say, it talks about how every people and every religion has a direction to which their followers turn and pray, and the Kaaba is the direction that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to turn. Okay, and so he explains this, as I mentioned in the first ruku. It's almost kind of a continuation of that topic, and a call to be grateful for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine blessings and prophecy, such as prophecy and the revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent. in the direction of the Kaaba or the Qibla and the orientation, and putting the Muslims, you could say, as this uh, the Ummah or the Khalifa, the successors of this world. Then we have the third section, okay, which goes from ayah number 153, which starts with Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ista'inu bis-sabri was-salah, inna Allaha ma'as sabirin, all the way to ayah number 163, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us to be patient and in salah, wasabri was salah, and to have patience and turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help through the salah or in the salah, and that each person will certainly be tested in some way or another. These are, if you're going through a test, if we're going through a test, we should go to these ayat. Actually, ayah number 155 to be specific. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the Safa and Marwa hills, where Hajar ran or walked between, and we do that sa'i when we go for Umrah and Hajj. And whatever practices or pastimes during the days of ignorance, the Jahiliyyah, that people used to do while calling for belief in divine oneness, so to Tawheed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling us again, everyone, to Tawheed and the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and denouncing the fact of concealing the truth that some of the people were doing. إن الذين يكتمون ما أنزلنا من البينات والهدى من بعد ما بيناه للناس في الكتاب أولئك يلعنهم الله ويلعنهم اللاعنون. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to those people who hide the truth. The fourth ruku, it starts from إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار, so ayah number 164, and it goes to 167. Okay, so this is the fourth ruku of this juz. This ruku talks about the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine greatness and power through nature, and those who refuse to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will realize this when they return to him on the day of judgment. The next ruku is from 168 and all the way to 176, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins the ruku, Ya ayyuhan nas kulu mimma fil ardi halalan tayyiba. So I mentioned this ayah yesterday. So he commands everyone to eat halal and tayyib food while recalling the seriousness of making illegal and lawful and so on. And so not making something that's lawful haram, and making something, or something lawful forbidden, and forbidden something allowed. So it's not allowed to do this. Mentioning of some consumption of illegal things, right? Unless there's a very extreme necessity, and it's a warning against hiding the truth again and using bribes and ulama or scholars, that they would change the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the divine book. This is the previous nations, and they would do it for a paltry price, or they would falsify information. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning us over here to not be of those people who do that. Ayah number 177, it's a beautiful verse. I cannot talk about it in detail right now, and I'll come back to it inshallah in a bit. It's called Ayatul Bir. It's very, very important. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins this ruku, ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب, and so on. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defines the people of taqwa and what is really goodness, what is al-bir, and which does not depend on human reasoning, but what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands. So it's not just what we think is good or what society defines as good or moral, but what God defines as moral and just and good. And then there's a mention of some principles and wisdom behind the law of retaliation, okay, like revenge, and the importance of the will and the sharing of heritage. And of course, it is better to forgive and so on, but inheritance is now mentioned, and the sharing of one's heritage with others. Okay, the next ruku, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he talks from ayah number 183, okay, all the way to, and this was the mention of last week's khutbah about on the fasting, so 188. So 183 to 188, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kutiba alaykumus siyam kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. So the obligation of fasting during the month of Ramadan, its objective, some rules, and a principle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants ease for his creation. This is a very, very important principle, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants good for his creation. He's Ar-Rahman, he's Ar-Rahim, he's the most merciful, and he always wants mercy and goodness for his people, for the creation. And then there is a mention of severity of unlawfully and unjustly seizing the property of others, which happens unfortunately a lot. Okay, the next ruku, which is 189 to 196. This ruku is talking about the Hajj and some of its rules and authorization for self-defense. And so if you look at ayah number 190, 191, and so on, these are the ayat that they call about jihad, right? So they misconstrue these verses to say that it's saying that go and kill people and this and that, and this is not, of course, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. And so if you read these verses, okay, you will understand the context of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, and it is out of self-defense, and it is authorization for the Muslims who were in Medina to defend themselves against the people who kept attacking them from Mecca. Okay, the next section, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm going very quickly as you can see, 197 to over here 210. Okay, so this is talking about Hajj, and it's continues talking about the etiquettes of Hajj, the importance of dedicating oneself to dhikr, especially on the day of Arafah. Okay, and a warning against only wanting this world. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ, to ask for both worlds. And this is a call to fully embrace Islam and not just, parts of it. And so this ends at around 210, verse 210. The next section, سَلْ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ كَمْ آتَيْنَاهُمْ مِنْ آيَةٍ بَيِّنَةٍ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from ayah number 211 to ayah number 216, these are longer verses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds again the Bani Israel some of the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them, their ingratitude, and warning against having the same attitude. So it's a warning for us Muslims as well, not to think that we're better than anyone else, not to think an Arab is better than a Pakistani, or a Pakistani is better than a Somali, and a Somali is better than this, and no, these things don't matter, right? It is our taqwa, it is our fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, depending on how close we are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what really, really matters, not our skin color, our tone, our, all of these things, that the outward appearance of someone. It's our heart and how if it's closely attached to God or not. And then it also mentions about the believers being severely tested, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best where man's profit lies. Okay, so we're at about 216, 217. So the next ruku, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الشَّهْرِ الْحَرَامِ قِتَالٍ فِيهِ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks from ayah number 217 to 221. He talks about the mentioning of the sacred months, as well as the gravity of killing towards them during them. This was a time, 4 months in the Islamic calendar, which were not allowed to fight. There was no fighting allowed. And the mushrikeen of Makkah, they would play around with these months, change them, and they would fight and do different things. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the sacredness of these months. But he does also mention that the fitna is worse than slaughter, right? Causing fitna, causing corruption, causing hatred, and things like this. This is worse than killing. And the first verse evoking the prohibition of wine, okay, is mentioned. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages us to take care of the property of the orphans, mentions one of the principles of marriage, okay, or of one of the principles of marriage, prohibiting marriage to people who are distant in terms of belief. So polytheists, okay, mushrikeen, someone who puts a partner with God, as a Muslim, we are not allowed to marry that person. Ayah number 222 to ayah number 228. So this next ruku', it talks about some rules of intimacy. It talks about oaths and breaking the oath. And if you break an oath or a promise, you have to fast for 3 days, or you could feed people, and so on. And then some of the rulings of divorce. And then from ayah number 229 to all the way to 231, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues that discussion. الطلاق مرتين مرتان sorry فإمساك بمعروف أو تسريح بإحسان. That the divorce is, of 3 times basically, and if you're going to release that person, do it with ihsan. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the more principles relating to the fiqh of divorce, and of course we're not going to get into that. This is just a bird's eye view of that, and we're almost coming to the end, inshallah. The next section is talking about ayah number 232 all the way to 235. Okay, so this next section continues the principles of divorce, the fiqh of divorce, or how to divorce someone properly, breastfeeding, remarriage of women after the divorce or the death, like if a woman is widowed, and how to do that. And so this section talks about this. Um, Lots of hikmah, of course, that is mentioned over here. But basically, we are learning that Islam is a way of life. It tells us how to live our lives A to Z in the accordance to with God's command. And if we were to do that, how beneficial and how peaceful this life will be, and then of course in our hereafter as well. The next section, it goes from 236 all the way to 242, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he talks about some principles concerning divorce and dowry, importance of attendance and of the prayers, and particular Salatul Wusta, okay, the middle prayer, the Asr prayer. Some scholars say that it's the Fajr prayer, but we're not going to talk about the difference. But it's the middle prayer, which is extremely important. But all 5 daily prayers, of course, we need to pray. And then financial, uh, benevolence and helping out and kindness when a person is separated from their wife, to take care of her during that time and trying to reconciliate with one another. So this is mentioned in this part of the surah. The next section is 243 all the way to 248. Okay, so this section 243 to 248, it talks about to explain fate, life, and death, as well as the distribution of sustenance that lies between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That everything is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hands and in His control, and so we need to make sure that we understand that in that sense. من ذا الذي يقرض الله قرضا حسنا فيضاعفه له أضعافا كثيرة. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala multiplies the goodly loan when we give sadaqah. When we give a loan to someone, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala multiplies it manyfold. And there's, of course, many things to be said about, sadaqah and charity and so on. But the next section over here, it talks about Talut. Talut was a king in the time of Bani Israel. He was a righteous person. And ayah number 249 all the way till the end of the Juzz, which is 252. So this second Juzz is completed by the story of Talut's story about Dawood alayhi salam and Jalut. Okay, and so this the previous ruku, mentions about David and Goliath, or Dawood alayhi salam and Jalut, and in the beginning of Talut. And this ruku, at the last page of this second Juz, it's a continuation of Talut, the King Talut's story, and the trial suffered and the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that comes as a sign of prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And mainly the principle that we're learning over here, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't neutralize one part of men with another. The earth, if He didn't do that, the earth would have become very corrupted. Okay, so if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't allow one group of people to kind of overpower, you could say, another group, then it would be total corruption on earth. And so there has to be this balance of power that occurs, so for peace to be in this society, or in a society. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also teaches us a beautiful dua. رَبَّنَا أَفْرِغْ عَلَيْنَا صَبْرًا وَثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَنَا وَانْصُرْنَا عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. Right? And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fill our hearts with sabr and thabat, with perseverance, right? And make our firm feet firm in this. وَانْصُرْنَا عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. And give us help and strength with the people of disbelief. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions a lot of different things, of course, in this surah, but this is a quick bird's eye view of what the Sheikh will be reciting, inshallah, tonight. I hope you guys are benefiting from the series. Just maybe a few other things really quickly. As I mentioned, 177, Ayatul Bir, very beautiful ayah. I really suggest everyone goes through it. But basically, it's telling us that piety doesn't just look from like the outwardly looking, the way the person's beard is, or the hijab, or the outward appearance of someone. That's not really what piety is. Or piety is not facing in one direction and not facing another direction. That's not what piety is. Piety is really to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to believe in God, to believe in the last day, to believe in the angels, to believe in the books, to believe in the prophets, alayhi salatu wassalam, to spend from one's wealth for Allah's pleasure, okay, on your relatives, the ones who hurt you or the ones who say things about you, whatever, but you spend on them. You spend on the orphans, you spend on the needy, the masakeen, right? You spend on others who are needy, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clarifies it. Then to establish the prayer, okay, and to perform it correctly as it should be performed, and to be steadfast on it, to pay the zakah, the yearly alms or the annual alms once a year. You give from your savings 2.5% of what you saved to the needy people, and to fulfill and uphold treaties and agreements that you've done, and to remain patient in times of difficulty and hardship. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala began the surah, that hudallil muttaqin, that the people who have taqwa will truly benefit from the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is further explaining in this verse what that really means. What are the people, or who are the people of taqwa? I'm a little bit over time again. Apologize for that. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.